let's take a deep dive on the impact of social influence and how it's affecting the way women in particular do business. Social influence refers to the phenomenon where an individual's behaviors, opinions, and beliefs are changed as a result of the network they surround themselves with and ties, often becoming more familiar with those that they are connected to. And in the realm of business, when it comes to creating and maximizing revenue and impact, it's important for women and other social media influencers alike to embrace the power of a podcast. According to recent data from my friends at The Social Shepherd, it revealed that a significant majority of influencers, particularly women, monetize their content by a podcast and social media by a clip of 77%. Women are creating content to make money, and a significant portion of women are also using other media strategies in order to make consistent revenue. For my friend Shayna Rattler Davis, she's the powerhouse behind both the mic and the boardroom. As a global 3% podcaster, income strategist, and mentor to women, Rattler Davis is on a mission to turn influence into income. She helps top companies, celebrities, and politicians to secure big deals in the media and corporate space, and now she's equipping women to do the same. She says that our influence is our currency, and the more multidimensional and specific ways you can help people and communicate that into an effective story that someone will care about, the more money that you'll make. For Rattler Davis, it's all about turning visibility into profitability. And she joined me this week to have a conversation about how podcasting is changing the ways of our social influence in business and how we can use it as a revenue generating tool. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. You believe that podcasting is a great way for influencers and those who want to get into a better media exposure to get their names out there, my friend. So I'm wondering if we can start our conversation by asking you about the value of podcasts and why they've become so valuable, my friend.
Absolutely. So, number one, podcasting is like the modern day vehicle for massive reach and unlimited income. And I believe that anyone, especially women, if you have a message, skills, or expertise, I believe that you should have a podcast. But the problem is that many of us, wherever we have our influence, if it's in social media, if it's podcasting, whatever our platforms are, the problem tends to be, Kevin, that we're visible and not necessarily profitable. And so what I am really focused on is how do you use your show for high value activities or high value clients, high value opportunities, not your standard ways of monetizing your show like what many people teach. So the skinny of it is that if you want to have impact and you want to have reach, there's no better place in this day and age, and I believe into the forever future, than being able to have your influence showcased on a podcast and using that to bring in really high value opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shayna, I know that you're on a mission to turn influence into income, my friend, for female entrepreneurs and other media personalities, my friend. So, what do you think is the key to turn influence into income, my friend?
Well, I think the key is what is the type of monetization strategy that you have? Because I like to say that number one, influence without a strategy is like having a treasure chest that you don't know how to open. And a podcast without a business model is just a hobby. And so the key is to have a monetization strategy where you take your show, the visibility of your show, but then you build an ecosystem around your show of products and services and partnerships. And I call that visibility ROI. So it's like, how do you use your visibility of your show or of your platform, of your YouTuber, or creating content in different places? But recognizing that if you build an ecosystem around your show, really building a business model around your show, that's what's going to elevate your income. So all of this starts with the mindset that your show is more than just a microphone, it's a gateway to opportunity. If your audience can't buy into that, then it's going to be very difficult for them to really turn their influence into income if they're only looking at their platforms as an opportunity to share their message.
Yeah, Jen, I know it's very important to you to promote women's empowerment, my friend. And I'm curious, how do you work with women specifically to increase their visibility and profitability, my friend? Because as you know, in today's workforce, women still face the challenges of getting respected and noticed on some level. So, how do you help women become more empowered in the space, my friend?
Yeah. So it starts with how you position yourself. And I believe that, we've been taught for years that we should select a niche. We've been taught that the riches are in the niches, and they are. But if you really want to position yourself for maximum visibility and maximum profitability, you have to begin to see yourself beyond your industry and create what I call an umbrella brand. So I'll use myself for example. So even though I have grown my show to the top 3% in the world, even though podcasting is central to my strategy of how I teach people to turn their influence into income, I don't position myself as a podcasting expert. I position myself as an influence expert. And so what I want your audience to do is to recognize that they need to think about how they can package their expertise in terms of broader themes. Because when you do that, that's what's going to make you attractive to corporations. That's what's going to make you attractive to major media opportunities. That's what's going to make you attractive to book deals. I'll give you another example. Like, let's say you're a health coach and you help moms to lose weight. Well, that's a great niche expert, but it's very specific and not very scalable. So if you said, okay, well, instead of me positioning myself as a person that helps moms lose weight, that can be one way that you serve the arena, but your broader arena could be like women's total being. Because that's not just specific, that's scalable. That's not just a niche brand, that's a brand that's going to make you attractive for corporations to say, oh, well, how can you work with the women leaders in my corporation, teaching them how to have total well-being? Because I know they'll be more applicable to us and more beneficial to us as a company. That's the way a major media outlet can bring you in and go, you know what? March is Women's History Month, and we have an expert here that is going to teach women how to have total well-being in their life. You can see how much more impactful and how much more you can charge and how many more revenue streams you have access to by positioning yourself in broader themes than just the small niche that may be one of the ways that you can serve that broader area.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shayna, I don't know how much research you did on me, but I have a journalism degree, so I'm always in the mood to learn to tell better stories, my friend, and I know that you have an knack for telling great stories, my friend. So I'm wondering how you think we tell great stories today in today's media market, and how can we leverage our real world expertise both professionally and personally to be successful? What are your thoughts there?
There's an old saying that facts tell, but stories sell. And when you're thinking about telling your story, you have to realize that nobody cares about your story if they can't see how it applies to them. And so it's only a great story if the person can find themselves in two places. If they can find themselves in where you were and they can identify that where you are now is where they want to be. So, for example, when I think about some of the stories that I tell from the stage, I start off by saying, 5 years ago, I wouldn't answer my phone. 5 years ago, I was sitting in my attorney's office ready to file bankruptcy. And it was in that moment that I felt like I was at the end of my rope. So you may not have been filing bankruptcy. You may not have been not able to answer your phone because, the bill collectors were calling. But how many of you have found yourself at the end of your rope? Well, now you fast forward to I have a podcast that's in the top 3% in the world. I make all of this money. I do all of these things. And over the course of our talk, I'm going to share with you exactly how all of you can do that. So if I just told a story about, what, I had this bad business partner and I had to file, nobody cares about what you've been through. But if I can help you see how many of you have found yourself in a situation where you were experiencing what I were experiencing, or you were feeling like I was feeling, people can identify with that. And now that story is powerful. If I can end by saying, well, now what if I could show you how you could go from where I was then to where I am now? That makes them care about my story instead of me just like, oh, I'm going to tell my story. Nobody cares about your story unless you show them why they should care.
Yeah, Shayna, what do you think is the key to growing a great podcast?
I think you have to, it's very similar to what I just shared about the story. What is it that people want to know? What is it that people want to accomplish? What is it that people want to avoid? And you have to make sure that you're speaking to that and not necessarily the process of how you get them there. Because just like nobody cares about your story if you can't make it fit with what it is that they're doing, nobody cares about your process of how you get me somewhere. And so oftentimes I listen to podcast hosts, I listen to business owners, and when I ask them what they do, they don't really speak to me about the result. And that result, if they do, is usually not a result that I recognize that I have, that I want to achieve. They're focused more on, and then I do this and I do that, and then I help you do this, and I do an assessment. Like, I don't really care. If you can key in on what it is that your show is going to help me accomplish, that's what's going to have me listen to your show. I don't really care as much about what your tactics are, what your processes are to help me achieve that result. And so I want your audience to ask themselves, am I talking about, number one, the real end result that I do? And is that problem that I'm solving one that my audience recognizes they have? We've got to stop at all this cute, clever stuff like, oh, I help people thrive. What does that mean? That is going to mean something different to every single person that you speak to. And then how can you really say that you help somebody achieve a goal that 10 different people describe a different way?
Yeah, I'll use myself as an example as I ask you my next question. So, Shayna, I started this podcast 5 years ago when I left the YMCA as the lead job developer because I thought I was going back to a job that I had before I left the YMCA, but my contract was suspended because of COVID, so I had time on my hands, and I was born with cerebral palsy, and I found out at the age of 9 that I wouldn't be able to walk without assistance due to my cerebral palsy. And when I graduated college 15 years ago and went on job interviews to become a sports reporter, I was told at the time, because of my disability. News directors didn't think they wanted to hire me because they were worried about supporting my disability. So what I've done is I've turned this podcast into a vehicle to help me get speaking opportunities. So I go around now talking to businesses about how to build an inclusive culture with minimal effort. And one of the ways I do that is by taking clips from this podcast and giving them industry examples of what I'm talking about to, buttress what I'm telling them. So I'm curious to ask you, how do you think we can use real life stories and adversities in our lives to be successful media personalities or entrepreneurs? What are your thoughts there?
Can you ask the question in a different way? Because you said a lot, but I want to make sure that I'm answering specifically what you're asking.
Yeah, so what I specifically want to know is how can we use our own life story to sort of maximize our revenue and our value? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I'm going to go back to the answer that I gave you with the story. Why should I care? Right? Like there's a radio station that everyone is tuned into. WIIFM. What's in it for me?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and when I say nobody cares, I'm not saying people are insensitive and they don't, that they don't have compassion. But no one cares about your story or what you have been through in your life if you can't show them why they should care.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not about you and what it is that you've been through. It's about how you're able to use who you are and what it is that you've been through in order to help other people. So people have to be able to recognize, okay, now that you're talking about your life and you're telling your story, how can I now take what it is that you've learned along your journey and apply it to my journey so that I can get where it is that I want to go? Because otherwise it's just, oh, that's great, but I'm not necessarily going to be inspired or motivated to take any next level of action because you haven't really shown me what it is that I can do with what you've been through to get to where I'm going. It'll just stop at like, oh, wow, that's a phenomenal story. You've lived a phenomenal life. What's in it for me? How do I apply?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm also curious to ask you, how do you think we start great conversations on podcasts? Because a lot of podcast hosts have a script that they follow and questions they want to ask. But one of the reasons I believe podcasting is so effective is it's a genuine way to start conversation. So what do you think is a great way to start a podcast conversation?
Yeah. I believe that, you should do your research. You should have some general idea of where you want the conversation to go. But even if you have questions in mind that you want to ask someone, even if you have talking points that you have in mind of how you would answer questions, I think you should focus on acting like you're just having a conversation with a friend on the couch, just having a conversation with a friend around the dinner table, because that's going to translate so much better than, well, I went from this question and now that I'm done with that question, I'm going right into the next question. Like people will be more tuned in and be more likely to listen again and stay engaged if they feel like they were just overhearing a conversation that two friends were having together instead of like a stoic, structured line by line. Well, we're done with that. Let's move into the next thing kind of conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend, I'm also curious to ask you about how do you think we can maximize it's the whole idea of building relationships because Shayna, there's a sign in my office that says life is a constant game of networking because I believe that networking is the heartbeat to any business or opportunity that we undertake, my friend. So what do you think is the key to maximizing the potential of working and personal relationships?
Starting by figuring out how you can help them. There was an opportunity that I was given one time. There is a company that publishes magazines, specifically diversity magazines, whether it is STEM or women or minorities, or there's all these different diversity magazines that they publish. I have been given the opportunity to write for almost every single one of those magazines more than once. Why? Because when I met the publisher and the CEO of the company at an event, the very first question that I asked her is, how can I help you? How can I support you? And she stopped for a minute. It was kind of like, I was like, did she not understand the question? Like almost the visceral reaction that she had was astounding. And she said, no one has ever asked me that. Most people, they know who I am and what it is that I do, and they immediately recognize how I can help them, and they only want to have conversations about how I can help them. And so I would say that if you're looking to really build solid relationships and relationships that are going to be partnerships and long term and not just transactional, you should go into every single one of those with a list of ideas of how you can help them and not a list of ideas of how they can help you.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you one of my earlier questions in a different format, and I'm curious, how do you think podcasting has really revolutionized or modernized or diversified the modern workforce today? How do you think podcasting has really changed the way that we look at how we could hire people or the workforce in general? What are your thoughts there?
It gives you an opportunity to experience people ahead of time. If you want to think about the workforce specifically, especially the hiring process, you don't necessarily know what you're getting until after you've hired that person. You don't necessarily know what you're getting until you've entered into a partnership with that person. You don't necessarily know what you're getting until after the ink is dry. So when you look at podcasting, because companies are using podcasts now as well, it really gives you the opportunity to like sample the person, if you will. It gives you the opportunity to try them on before you take things further with them. But it also gives you access. Podcasting, regardless of the side of the mic that you're on, will really transform the way that we operate professionally, because it gives you access to people that you may not have had access to otherwise, whether you're on the hosting side or whether you're on the guest side.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shayna, I know that you're a big believer in owning your own power and elevating your income, my friend, which creates legacies, which matter. So what does that mean to you, and what do you think others need to know to do the same, my friend?
I think we have to recognize that our influence is a currency, but we're not necessarily looking at our influence as an asset. And so when I say own your influence, I'm looking at, owning your voice, owning your message, and then literally owning it in terms of monetizing it. And there, that's a whole nother podcast episode, in itself. But we have to recognize that our influence is an asset. We have to recognize that our influence is currency. And in order to successfully navigate the current eras that we're in order to be successfully, we have to start with that mindset shift of my influence is actual currency. My influence is an actual asset. The problem is that we're not being intentional about it.
Yeah, and you said that people shouldn't start a conversation with, I've never even had a podcast before, my friend. So how do we get people to reverse their thinking and ask them how can we encourage them to sort of rethink the approach of getting into podcasting in the first place? What are your thoughts there?
I would think that if we're 22 minutes into this conversation and if they still don't know why podcasting would work for them, then I don't think they should have a podcast. I mean, we've been talking about this is a booming industry. There was a study that came out not that long ago that said podcast hosts are 7 times more influential than social media influencers. Podcast hosts are 5 times more influential than people who are on television and celebrities. We've talked about the fact that your podcast is a gateway to opportunity. We've talked about the fact that a podcast will help you build relationships. We've talked about the fact that a podcast will make you money. So if 22 minutes into this conversation, they still are asking the question of why they should have a show, then they've either been multitasking and not been listening, or this legit is not the world for them.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you to comment on a study from the BBC that revealed that companies who have a branded podcast experience an 89% increase in brand recognition. So I know that you would probably agree with that, but tell me what first comes to mind when you hear that statistic, my friend?
It's revolutionized the way people consume content. People are not watching television as much anymore. That's why you have streaming platforms that are more effective and beneficial and profitable than the regular television networks. It's no different with podcasts. It's the modern day vehicle of media. It's the modern day way that people are consuming their content. There are millions of people that are listening to podcasts every single day. So, and that's not going to change. And so, yeah, like visibility, profitability, all of the things that you can measure, most people are playing in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend, I know that you also work with people to determine what vehicle is best for them from a media perspective, whether it's writing a book, starting a podcast, being a guest on a podcast, or creating that sort of ecosystem of revenue, which we've talked about. So I'm curious, how do you guide people into the right ecosystem for revenue generation on a consistent basis, my friend?
Some of it depends on what it is that they've already created. Some of it depends on what it is that they've already done. Some of it depends on where they're naturally gifted at. If someone was not a good communicator, I would not recommend that they start by trying to be on television. I wouldn't recommend that they start by saying, "Oh, major media experience is where I want to start." But if I was working like with a business owner, for example, and I was to say, you're already getting paid for giving your advice. People are already paying you for your knowledge. Then corporate contracts is the most natural extension of that. I would help them to develop, like, what is your umbrella brand? How can we look at your expertise in broader themes? Because that's going to be the most natural extension to the advice that you're already given. Use the example of the health coach again. You're a health coach and you teach moms how to lose weight. I would help them determine how they create their umbrella brand and figure out what would be the value proposition for a corporation to bring you in to do workshops, training, consulting, paying you to speak, just because that's the most natural extension. So sometimes it depends on what you have accomplished, and then other times it also varies based on what are your strengths, what are your skill sets. And then I also recognize that there are things that we need to focus on now, and there's things that we need to continue to focus on that will happen later. I call it now money now and greater money later. For some people, it's like, let's get you started with the contracts because that's a way that you can monetize it now. But it may be a while before you're ready and have the things in place that a traditional publisher would want to see. So if that's the case, I would never tell you to start trying to get an agent and write a proposal for a publishing house, because you may not necessarily be ready for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've asked you a lot today about diversity, equity, and inclusion, my friend. But when we drill down from the podcasting space, my friend, how do you define diversity, equity, and inclusion in the podcasting space? What does that mean to you?
I don't know that it's any different than anywhere else. Your voice matters. Your voice should be there. It should be equal across the board. Like I have a problem with this conversation. I have a problem that people think that you should look at DEI differently in one space versus the other. The same thing should be considered. And the fact that we're even having a conversation about how does it apply differently over here, I think is part of the problem. I'm not saying you're part of the problem, but I think if we're continuing to look at like, well, how does it apply differently over here, then we're automatically not being inclusive. We're automatically not looking at this from the standpoint that we need to look at it, because it shouldn't matter whether we're talking about who you hire or what's happening in the podcasting space. If you have DEI protocols or processes or thoughts in place, it should be the same across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we talk a lot about currency. And one of the things I tell people is that when I talk to business people, I tell them that their people are their best asset, and the best leaders in the corporate space know how to incorporate their people and value their opinion to create sort of the competitive advantage of over their competition, because they're listening and investing in their people. And it's my belief, if you do that, then the people that you're in charge of leading are more invested in sort of the process of moving the company forward. So I'm curious to ask you, what do you think of the notion of, as a leader, with people being your best asset? What are your thoughts there?
Well, you can't do it alone. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, if you think you're going to build anything effective and not have people that are going to help you get there, then I think you're doomed before you start it. But I think that it's really about aligning with the right people. And sometimes we have to remove our preconceived notion or our biases that we have. So, for example, I was talking with a lady one day, and she only wanted to hire people in her company that believed what she believed. And I was like, you're going to have a very myopic company. It's going to be very difficult for you to be innovative if everybody on your team believes like you believe. Like if you don't have diversity of thoughts and diversity of beliefs and diversities of backgrounds and experiences, it's going to be very difficult for you to innovate. If you're all just trying to look the same, talk the same, be the same. So I don't think anyone is wanting to start anything and they don't value that they should have people. But I think we need to rethink our approach to what type of people that we actually want to bring to the table with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to end, Shayna, on this two-part question, because I'm curious to get your thoughts on the future of women in the space of media and podcasting, and how do you think women should know their value? And secondarily, I'm also curious to ask you, when you look at your own life and legacy, how do you want that to be defined, my friends?
Yeah. People have to recognize that their influence is their superpower. But the only way that they're going to have the superpowers that is actually inside of them is that they have to own it. They have to be bold. They have to be willing to show up. They have to be willing to be consistent. And they have to be willing to recognize that my grandmother used to have a saying, if you don't think it, no one's going to think it for you. Now, she was a little bit more country than that and used less sophisticated words. But basically, she was saying it doesn't matter how influential you are. If you don't first think it and you don't first believe it, then you definitely can't expect anyone else to think it and believe it about you or for you. So we really have to start by it's an internal job first before we start to think about how we can own it and how we can expect people to buy it, if you will. I'm not talking about in the literal sense. But in my own life, I want to be recognized as someone that we live in a space right now where, especially with a lot of online stuff, that there's really no level of sophistication to what it is that people are teaching, because they took a course to learn how to do a course, and then they master the algorithm and they're selling a lot of courses, but there's no depth and diversity of experience behind them. And I want to be known as someone that has walked the talk and has been willing to teach other people what it is that I scraped my knees trying to figure out. Like, especially in the Black community, sometimes we think that if we struggle to figure something out, that everybody else should have to struggle to figure it out too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just don't kind of believe in that crab in the bucket mentality. So that's what I want to be known for. Someone that was willing to, now you got to pay me for it. I'm not doing anything for free. But someone that was willing to let my losses be your lessons and not make you have to figure it out yourself, but being willing to share what it is that I know.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend, finally tell me if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Absolutely. So, number one, if you're looking for me on social media, I'm the most active on Instagram. So that's Shayna Rattler Davis. And then I want to give your audience a free gift. So, if you really want to turn your legacy into wealth and impact, I have what's called my Influence Economy Playbook that you can get at influenceeconomyplaybook.com. And if you type in the word free, you don't have to pay for it.
Well, fantastic, my friend. I really believe you're doing fantastic work in the field of podcasting and women's empowerment. And I want to thank you for being here today, engaging in conversation with me, and answering my questions. Your time and attention to this matter is most appreciated.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much.